Good day, everyone. I, Jubelle Rosal, together with my group mates, Andrie Marcjay Rosite, Simon Urbiztondo, and Euve Grace Ross, are going to give a summary about Lesson 4, which is all about Marxism. Marxism. Marxism is known to be a worldwide and method of societal analysis that focuses on class relations and societal conflict that uses a materialistic interpretation of historical development and a dialectical view of social transformation. Marxism is also a difficult and contentious body of work, but it is also more than this. It is a body of revolutionary theory with the purpose of changing the world. In various ways, the point is to change. We should know that the main point of Marxism, or the focus, is on how philosophers interpreted the world, which means refers to a change. This makes Marxist analysis political in a quite specific way. Marxism can serve as a mode of analysis, examining the relationship between ownership, power, and social change, and thus illuminate a wider variety of social transformation than whatever is currently dominant. What makes the Marxist theory methodology different from other historical approaches to culture is in the Marxist conception of history. The Marxist approach of culture insists that text and practices must be analyzed in relation to their historical conditions of productions and, in some versions, the changing conditions of consumptions and receptions. And now, let's proceed to classical Marxism. Classical Marxism refers to the economic, philosophical, and sociological theories expounded by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels as constructed with later developments in Marxism, especially Marxism itself. In addition, it also refers to the second era of Marxism. At some point, Marx argues that each significant period in history is constructed around a particular mode of production, that this is the way in which society is organized to produce the necessities of life, food, shelter, and etc. The main focus or idea of classical Marxism is mostly of mode production, that is ultimately determines the political, social, and cultural shape of that society and its possible future development. Marx explains that the mode of production of material life conditions the social, political, and intellectual life process in general. In connection with this, a classical Marxist approach to popular culture would above all else insist that to understand and explain a text or practice, it must be situated in its historical movement of production, analyzed in terms of the historical conditions that produce. It is the changes that a Marxist would argue. And that would be all. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Andrie Marcjay Rosete, and I will talk to you about the Althusserianism. Who is the person behind Althusserianism? The person behind Althusserianism is Louis Pierre Althusser, which was a French Marxist philosopher. He was born in Algeria from 1918 to 1948. Studied at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. Althusser is also a long-time member of the French Communist Party. The ideas of Louis Althusser have had an enormous influence on cultural theory and popular culture. As whole of 1978 suggests, Althusser's interventions and their consequent developments are enormously formative for the field of cultural studies. Althusser's most significant contribution to the field is his different attempts to theorize the concept of ideology. Althusser begins by rejecting mechanistic interpretation of the base or superstructure formation, insisting instead on the concept of the social formation. According to Althusser, a social formation consists of three practices: the economic, the political and the ideological. The relationship between the base and the superstructure is not one of expression. In other words, the superstructure being an expression or passive reflection to the base, but rather, the superstructure is seen as necessary to the existence of the base. The model allows for the relative autonomy of the superstructure. Determination remains, but it is determination in the last instance. This operates through what he calls the structure in dominance. That is, although the economic is always ultimately determinant, this does not mean that in a particular historical conjuncture, it will necessarily be dominant. Under feudalism, for example, the political was the dominant level. Nevertheless, the practice that is dominant in a particular social formation will depend on the specific form of economic production. What he means by this is that the economic contradictions of capitalism never take any pure form. The economic is determinant in the last instance, not because the other instances are its epiphenomena, but because it determines which practice is dominant. Althusser produced 3 definitions of ideology, 2 of which have proved particularly fruitful of the student of popular culture. The first definition, which overlapped in some ways with the second, is the claim that ideology, a system of representations, for example, images, myths, ideas, or concepts, is a practice through which men and women live their relations to the real conditions of existence. By practice, I mean any process of transformation of a determinate given raw material into a determinate product, a transformation effected by determinate human labor using determinate means of production. Therefore, as the economic, the historically specific mode of production transforms certain raw materials into products by determinate means of production, involving determinate relations of production. So, ideological practice shapes an individual's lived relation to the social formation. In this way, ideology dispels contradictions in lived experience. It accomplishes this by offering false but seemingly true resolutions to the real problems. We should also know that this is not a conscious process, as ideology is a profoundly unconscious in its mode of operation. The relationship is both real and imaginary in the sense that ideology is the way we live our relationship to the real conditions of existence at the level of representations. There are real conditions and there are the ways we represent these conditions to ourselves and to the others. This applies to both dominant and subordinate classes. Ideologies do not just convince oppressed groups that all is well with the world. They also convince ruling groups that exploitation and oppression are really something quite different, acts of universal necessity. Only a scientific discourse, for example the Althusser's Marxism, can see through ideology to the real conditions of existence. Because ideology for Althusser is a closed system, it can only ever set itself such problem as it can answer. That is, to remain within its boundaries. It must stay silent on questions which threaten to take it beyond these boundaries. According to Althusser, a problematic consists of the assumption, motivation, underlying ideas, and etc., from which a text is made. In this way, it is argued a text is structured as much by what is not said more than as by what is said. Althusser argues that if we are to fully understand the meaning of a text, we have to be aware of not only what is in a text, but also the assumption which may not appear in the text itself. One way in which a text's problematic is supposedly revealed is in the way a text may appear to answer questions which it has not formally posed. The task of an Althusserian critical practice is to deconstruct the text to reveal the problematic. To do this is to perform what Althusser calls a symptomatic reading. And that is all for my topic. Thank you for listening.
And now, let's tackle about hegemony. Hegemony was most likely derived from the Greek hegemonia, whose root is hegemon, meaning leader or ruler, often at the sense of state other than his own. The definition for how Antonio Gramsci considers hegemony is a political concept developed to explain, given the exploitative and oppressive nature of capitalism, the absence of socialist revolutions into Western capitalist democracies. The concept of hegemony is used by Gramsci 2009 to refer to a condition in process in which a dominant class, in alliance with other classes or class fractions, does not merely rule a society but leads it through the exercise of intellectual and moral leadership. In other words, hegemony is a political leadership based on the consent of the led, a consent which is secured by the dissemination and popularization of the worldview of the ruling class. The ruling class is the social class that is powerful, who decides and sets the society's political plan. In a more essential sense, the concept of hegemony can be understood as teaching citizens of our country by the ruling class how to follow rules, obey authority figures, and behave in accordance to expected norms, so that we all exhibit the similar behaviors. Hegemony is never simply power imposed from above. It is always the result of negotiations between dominant and subordinate groups, a process marked by both resistance and incorporation. So there are of course limits to such negotiations and concessions, where in times of crisis, when moral and intellectual leadership is not enough to secure continued authority, that's the time that the processes of hegemony are temporarily replaced by the coercive power of the repressive state apparatus, such as the army, the police, the prison system, and many more. Hegemony is organized by those whom Gramsci designates organic intellectuals. According to Gramsci, intellectuals are distinguished by their social function. That is to say, all men and women have the capacity for intellectual endeavor, but only certain men and women have in society the function of intellectuals. The concept of hegemony allows students of popular culture to free themselves from the disabling analysis of many of the previous approaches to the subject. Therefore, the hegemony theory allows us to think of popular culture as a negotiated mix of what is made both from above and from below, both commercial and authentic, a shifting balance of forces between resistance and incorporation.
Good day everyone, I am Evelyn Grace Ross, and for today I am going to give a summary about the post-Marxism and cultural studies. Angela McRobbie of 1992 observes that Marxism is no longer influential in cultural studies as it has been in the past, as she pointed out that Marxism has been undermined not just from the viewpoint of the postmodern critics, but also as a result of the events in Eastern Europe with the discrediting of much of the socialists. Certainly, she explained that the return to a pre-postmodern Marxism, as marked out by critics like Frederick Jameson and David Harvey, is untenable because the terms of that return are predicated on prioritizing economic relations and economic determinations over culture and politics relations by positioning these latter in a mechanical and reflectionist role. But more than this, there is a real sense in which cultural studies has always already post-Marxist. As Hall of 1992 pointed out, that there was never a prior moment when cultural studies and Marxism represented a perfect theoretical fit. From the beginning, there was always already the question of the things that Marx did not talk about or seem to understand, which were our privileged object of study, such as culture, ideology, language, the symbolic. Instead, these were always already the things which had imprisoned of Marxism as a mode of thought, as an activity of critical practice. That is to say, the encounter between British cultural studies and Marxism has first to understand as the engagement with a problem, not a theory, not even a problematic. The term post-Marxism first appeared in Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffel's theoretical work Hegemony and Socialist Strategy. To be post-Marxist is to leave behind Marxism for something better, whereas to be post-Marxism is to seek to transform Marxism by adding its recent theoretical developments. Laclau and Mouffe envisage a partnership between Marxism and the new feminism, the protest movement of ethnic, national and sexual minorities, the anti-institutional ecology struggles waged by marginalized layers of the population, the anti-nuclear movement, and the atypical forms on social struggles in countries on the capitalist periphery. Basically, cultural studies is post-Marxist in the positive sense advocated by Laclau and Mouffe. Furthermore, the concept of discourse is central to the development of post-Marxism. According to Laclau and Mouffe, it consists in the totality of the linguistic and non-linguistic. So, for instance, if you are going to pass a certain object to another one, the linguistic form is when you say, "Can you please get this object?" And the non-linguistic is when the someone will get the certain object from you. They use the term discourse to emphasize the fact that every social configuration is meaningful. And yeah, that's all about our summary in the lesson 6, which is Marxism, and we hope that you learned something from us. Thank you for watching. Bye.